I'm Alan Wardis, and you're listening to Think Radio.
It's actually the same facility that President Bush went to the morning of 9/11. I was standing in a hallway in a helmet and a flak vest. I was 19, just turned 20 maybe. And President Bush runs by me. That was a very interesting morning.
I was joined recently by Steve Otero, Gunnison County Veterans Service Officer, and Ryan Jordi, commander ofGunnison's American Legion Post 54. We talked about what it means to be a veteran in America today, and about how everyday people can get involved with making a difference. Stay tuned for this episode of Think Radio.
Think Radio is supported by the Gunnison Country Times, Gunnison's locally owned hometown newspaper, and by the Western State Colorado University Office of Academic Affairs. Think Radio is also supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can become a Think Radio patron, visit alanwardesmedia.com. That's ALANWARTES media.com.
Ryan, Steve, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
Great to be here.
We've got a lot of territory to cover when you talk about Veterans Affairs in the United States. That is a big mouthful. There are so many moving parts, so many issues that are important. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the fact that you guys are veterans yourselves. You're involved in serving veterans at various levels, but you came up through that culture and that life experience yourself. I want to hear about that. I want to understand your story. Ryan, let's start with you. Tell us about your service and what you did.
Definitely. Well, I joined in 92, did 5 years, 92 to 97. I was interested in aviation. I wanted to be a airline pilot, probably was kind of my high school dream. So I knew I was signed up for a school actually to get my pilot's license and all the commercial and multi-engine and everything, but went the military route. Figured that was a way to get in an airplane, so to speak.
Well, so many people do. That's a pretty common thing.
Yeah, and I didn't know what path I was going to go, but I knew I could be in an airplane. So I joined with the air crew and went into a rating that was called Anti-Submarine Warfare Operator and got into learning about submarines and whether they're a good guy or a bad guy.
So submarines and aircraft are not two things that you normally put together, but there you go.
There we go, hunting them. So then I went into a direction called Rescue Swimmer School, which it was a really, I guess you would say, physical, mental. They really tried to wean people out. They wanted you to quit that school. It was so they really tested you. I was only 18 years old, and to experience that rigorous curriculum and everything. And fortunately, one neat thing is I was able to become the leader of my platoon, or whatever you want to call it. So it was kind of neat to be blamed for everything.
That's what leadership is, right?
So that was intriguing, but once you went into that direction, then I got into helicopters once you made it through the Rescue Swimmer School, and it was amazing. I mean, my first flight was, I actually threw up, and and it scared me, of course, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm down this pathway, and I got airsick. Never happened again, so I had about 1,000 hours in the helicopter.
And what does a rescue swimmer do?
It was pretty neat. So I was stationed. I guess my helicopter was a Seahawk, H-60 Seahawk, and we were the taxi cab for for dignitaries. I even had Benjamin Netanyahu on my helicopter once.
Is that right?
We were off of Israel doing operations. Fast rope SEAL teams to take over ships. There was just so many different missions that we did. It was really exciting. But our basic mission as a rescue swimmer, you had 2 crewmen in the back. One was suited up for, wearing a wetsuit and everything to jump into the water in case a airplane went down during flight operations. And then you just sat starboard delta, basically, is what they called it, during flight ops, during takeoffs and landings of the carrier.
Just ready to jump.
Yep.
So you were one of those fabled people in the military who was paid to jump out of a perfectly functional
there
aircraft.
There you go. Yep. Well, that just reminded me with my mother. she was surprised we didn't have parachutes, So it was like, what are you going to do? I was like, well, you do a controlled crash and
Oh boy.
you basically wait till the thing stops moving and then you get out.
Dude, that is not something you say to your mother.
But yeah, there's no way.
Did Ashton Kutcher play you in a movie?
I
Wasn't
think
that?
there was some Coast Guard, right?
Something,
That-
yeah.
I saw that film.
It
I
was a
didn't
little-
realize that was your story.
It was similar. We did have Coast Guard go through the same rescue swimmer school. It was, but I mean, I loved the job. It was exciting. At 20 years old, 21, you're checking over a helicopter, making, you really grew up.
Sure. Things get real quick.
Yeah, and I think it just propelled me for the rest of my life to this point, with confidence, with stress level. You see people get stressed on some things and you're like, well, nobody came close to dying, just it really tempered things. So it was a great thing. When my 5 years was up, I just didn't want to do 20, I guess I wanted a new chapter. I wanted to be a ski bum, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but a ski bum who knows how to jump out of helicopters.
There you go.
Save people's
Rescue.
lives, right?
Exactly. Steve, how about you? Let's hear your story.
Sure. Blue collar working class family. Grew up in Houston, Texas. Joined the military at 18. Dad was a cop. Mom was a teacher. Had a pretty cool upbringing, I think. Dad took me camping all the time. That's probably why I ended up moving to the mountains. But, I joined the military, fresh out of high school, and I went in open general, which they say is kind of a dangerous thing to do because you may end up being assigned a job that you might not be happy with.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess maybe thankfully my ASVAB scores were high enough to where they gave me my first pick. I'm not really sure, but
And ASVAB being the battery of tests that they give you when you go to the recruiting station.
right, that's the entrance exam basically.
Right.
It's like the SATs for the military.
Right.
It helps kind of rack and stack where your strengths and potential benefits to the military are, and then they help you decide jobs based on that.
Yeah, because there's no point in putting a rocket scientist in the infantry. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily want to be the smartest guy in the room every time.
No, not
that
always.
can be dangerous,
Yeah.
actually. My first pick was photography, and so right out of school, my school was in D.C., so stationed there for 6-7 months for school, and then pretty much right when I arrived at my first duty station in U.S. Strategic Command in Omaha, Nebraska, the military was transitioning over from film-based cameras to all digital-based cameras, and so it was pretty cool that I felt inspired because I was able to be a part of this big changeover, right? And it was new tech, young and excited and just ready to go, right?
Sure.
At 18. My first job was actually I was assigned to an intelligence film repository where we would manage U-2 spy plane imagery, and we'd help intelligence analysts gain access to certain images and enhance them for them and that sort of thing. That plane runs off of these gigantic 12,000-foot spools of film.
So in James Bond terms, you were in the Q branch.
We were, yeah, I mean, I worked in a bunker,
Yeah.
I think about 60, 70 feet underground. It's actually the same facility that President Bush went to the morning of 9/11. I was standing in a hallway in a helmet and a flak vest. I was 19, just turned 20 maybe. And President Bush runs by me. That was a very interesting morning.
So it's a common question. People ask, where were you on 9/11? You were in the bunker.
Well, I was in the hallway. I
In
wasn't in
the
the bunker. No,
hallway.
I don't want to misstate. No, not in the bunker, but yeah.
This is an interesting thing about a lot of people who serve in the military. Here we've got Ryan sitting here, having sat in the helicopter with the leader of Israel and done operations that other people can only just dream about and see in the movies. Here you are. You were at sort of at the epicenter of this incredible historic event. A lot of people who come out of the military have stories like that to tell.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to tell one of my own.
Good.
I went into the U.S. Army in 1980 and spent 8 years in. I was stationed in Berlin before the wall came down. I was there when Ronald Reagan stood at the Brandenburg Gate and said to Mikhail Gorbachev, "Open this gate."
Wow.
But that's
Yeah.
such a common experience. If you spend any time in the military, you tend to be there when stuff happens.
No small community, we
Yeah,
really are. We're a
yeah.
very small community, a microcosm of society. I mean, less than 1/2 of 1% serves in the military today.
Yeah. well and gathers these experiences along the way.
Correct.
But I didn't want to interrupt your story because there's
no.
more to it. So please
sure.
keep
I mean,
going.
I served for a total of 12 years. Had a couple of deployments in there, Iraq, Afghanistan. The Air Force and the Navy are the two branches of service responsible for providing combat camera personnel. We augment and supplement any and other branch of service. The Marines are riflemen first. The Armies are soldiers first, right? And so the Air Force and the Navy, we were specialized to provide these very specific imaging capabilities,
Right.
By air, land, and sea, that sort of thing. And so, I did that for a number of years, and then at a certain point, I got too hurt, and I came home from Afghanistan, spent a month in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center at the end of 2010, and then was transferred over to Walter Reed and spent 6 months there. And then, about a year later, was discharged.
Yeah, but I don't want to blow past the way you just did. You got too hurt because, okay, you were in one of these support imaging kind of jobs.
Sure.
But it put you right in the thick of things.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about why and what you were doing.
Well, a lot of the imaging that I did was utilized for battle damage assessment or post-blast assessment, which basically means that once our Marines or soldiers or whomever goes into an area and they may engage the enemy or not. Unfortunately, oftentimes they do. As they're finishing that up, or maybe immediately after they're done wrapping up the actual potential violence, then somebody like me would come in behind them and document the crime scene that was created during the engagement to protect the soldiers and Marines that are involved in that engagement, to protect these military personnel.
Basically document what
What, right, exactly. And especially because there's a lot of propaganda out there. And so with a person like me as a capability on the ground, then the commander has an extra layer of security to prove that, hey, we're acting within the law of war. We're acting within international law. We are doing our best to make sure that we're not, going in and doing anything that would be considered unprofessional during a time of war. And I know that sounds kind of like a funny, statement, but
well, no, it doesn't. I mean, we do have laws
that
govern how armies behave.
Right, and we train, the guys and gals that are there to exert force. Right, if they're there to commit, some type of a violent act in order to secure a target or prevent additional harm to a village,
or respond to an attack,
that sort of thing. I mean, these folks are trained to provide that capability in a very professional sense.
Right.
We don't like wasting ammo, bluntly.
Right.
There's no reason to.
Yep.
Our quiet professionals do their job, and then somebody like me comes in, documents that, and I make sure that the images, both still or motion, that those can stand up in court. And and sometimes I was called away from a variety of things to go and testify in court. And that's actually what cut my tour to Afghanistan short. It wasn't injury. I left Afghanistan with injuries, but I also didn't tell people that I was as hurt as I was.
Well, because look, the point is that job put you in a place where often the bullets were still flying.
Correct. Yeah. I mean,
and the grenades were still being tossed, and so you were hitting the ground.
I had to choose to push the button on my camera while others were pulling the trigger. Yep. That's what I had to choose to do, and I needed to be as calm about that as possible, because if I was pulling the trigger, something was really going wrong.
That was not your job.
Right.
All right, so let's fast forward from that, because we've heard Ryan's story and Steve's story. You guys in different ways and at different times, under different levels of conflict, let's say, served the nation in a way that puts yourself in harm's way. That can't always be said of every veteran. Some veterans, never come close to a situation like that, but so many do. But all these years later, you're discharged, you're a member of the civilian population again. You could have just disappeared into,
I tried.
It doesn't always work.
Nope.
But I guess the question there is, you didn't. Why not? Ryan, you've taken on leadership at the American Legion post here in Gunnison to continue service and involvement in this community of veterans. I'd like to know why. What motivates you?
Well, I feel like really the circumstances put me to that position. I I didn't do anything for about 15 years out of the military. And then I just started volunteering and pretty much always said yes. And
That very first time you volunteered, what motivated you to say yes?
A feeling to do something. We always ask that question of ourselves, why do we do it? And it's, you feel good about it. It's neat. And probably the biggest thing that I have the most gratification is doing funeral honors for veterans. And you don't know the person, you don't know the family. And once you're done, you feel so good for the rest of the day that you're just, that's probably the ground level thing that I think is the most important that I do with the American Legion and providing those funeral services, and then everything else kind of is extra bonus, I guess.
Right.
We do the flags out in town on the, the holidays. To me, that patriotic feeling, every time I look at our flag, it gives me a special feeling. I always feel we are the good guys. We're not perfect, but gosh, I think we're always fixing ourselves, It's a neat thing because I think we're a unique experiment with democracy and how we try to manage our capitalism and just what's right, what's fair. Some of the Middle East, what I saw.
That's a real eye-opener.
It's amazing what we got here and just what we complain about. So
it's one thing that expands your horizon big time. I want to go back to the question because if you were looking for a way to give back to your community, you could be working at the food bank. You could be helping people adopt abandoned pets, but you're not. Why?
There's that camaraderie of being a veteran. It's like a fraternity. I think it's something that you have that shared sense that we all put our hand up and made that oath. And I think it goes back to my love of the country. I really, everybody kind of redefines patriotism and you hear that, I'm a political guy too. I mean, I came here to Western and I eventually got, political science as one of my majors here. And I'm always intrigued with conversation about our politics and government and democracy and I think it all comes together. And maybe that's why I'm intrigued with our veterans and our, veterans is it's an easy niche for me. It's where it fits pretty much my path that I've chosen, I guess, so far.
Yeah, and because of your past, it's part of your tribe.
Yeah,
that makes sense. You resonate with the needs that those people have. Steve, what about you? I mean, you're actually employed by Gunnison County to help veterans find the services and the resources that they need. When you step back into civilian life, what was it that made you want to continue involvement?
So my first job out of the military, it was in finance, and the only reason that it was that I even considered going into finance after doing what I'd done was just because I needed money. I needed to get a new job. Right, I was done. The military said, "All right, here's your stuff, here's your papers, here's your
thanks for everything."
Right, thanks for your service. Goodbye. And I happened to have a wife who was 3 months and 1 week pregnant with twins.
That'll focus the mind.
And I had been preparing. I mean, we knew it was coming. Military time's over. And I read in a Forbes magazine that the city of Houston was actually the city with the highest paying jobs for all adults across America, age 25 to 35. So I thought to myself, well, that happens to work out really well because my mother still lives there, my father still lives there, my stepmother, brothers and sisters, etc. I'm the oldest of 6. And so, I thought, well, we want babies to be raised around their grandparents, right? Hopefully, right? I went and I worked for a mortgage company. I realized, though, that it wasn't doing that job specifically that was motivating me. It was the fact that the CEO actually gave me some leeway and some leash to help him set up, some of their outreach into the veteran community, to start working to get their company aligned with some veteran nonprofits, right? To get their employees out of the office, so that they could actually physically go and do some type of service projects, that sort of thing within the veteran community, right? Because the CEO realized, like, okay, well, I've only got a couple of veterans on staff, and we're a veteran-focused financial company. So let's dig deeper into the actual veteran community. And so he utilized me for that, and that was a lot of fun. He gave me a lot of room to create. That was the moment, that year of my life, that I realized that no one is going to be able to sway me with cash. Money doesn't motivate me. I kind of care less. I really don't care. What does motivate me is making people smile and making people feel and know that they're well taken care of. Like, that actually motivates me.
But here again, you could have reached out to anyone.
Sure.
And yet there's something about veterans that sort of tugs at you a little bit.
I think, there was a recent article I saw, I think it was taskandpurpose.com, one of those military sites that it has been talking about this recently, about how, maybe certain groups of us who have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, there are physical characteristics or stress in there, and anxiety in there, but maybe the anxiety is more tied to the loss of a community or the loss of the sense of community, right? When we're transitioning out of uniform and this regimented lifestyle that we are very comfortable in certain ways.
Because let's be honest, that level of community is hard to replicate in the civilian world.
I have not found it.
I mean, when you're a part of a helicopter crew and you're lifting off and you're going out over the Mediterranean, and you know good and well that today could be the day that you guys are all called upon to actually do the rescue swimming thing and to have each other's back. Where do you find that? How can you find that in civilian life? You're shaking your heads at me. Yeah. It's really difficult. And yet that is such a powerful part of the military experience.
It is. And, just working on our relationships, really, right? The relationships that we cultivate in normal lives. I'm 36 years old, right? I'm the old guy running around here at college campus, and I'm in school 2 days a week, and I'm consistently running into other young people who I look and I say, wow, like, that's probably the next young leader in this, field. Or, I'm meeting another young person who's a go-getter, who's already developing plans for this, that, and the other, and they have 2 side businesses and that sort of thing.
Right.
And that inspires me, being here, to see, in this school environment, you see all these very motivated people. So then that kind of rubs off. I think that energy is pretty contagious.
Yeah.
But we've also got to be willing to engage, right? If I was consistently withdrawing, as symptoms, veterans who have symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and any humans who have symptoms of post-traumatic stress, really,
they isolate
not just
themselves.
Vets. Right, we isolate. We always sit in the back. We stay away. We don't say very much. That sort of a thing.
Partly because we're afraid that no one will understand a single word we have to say,
right.
or a single experience that we would share. Or
we're embarrassed we could be judged. But me, again, being the old guy in the classroom, I don't care. Judge me, judge away, educate me too. If I'm lacking in an area, teach me. Come on, I'm ready to learn, right? I think, to me, that's one of the greatest things that I see about veterans that I meet daily, is that we choose to be adaptable creatures. We choose to embrace our environment and take it in,
Because you've been trained to do that. Every mission is different. Every day is different. That's a choice that veterans are more able to make.
Maybe. I don't know. I guess I'm kind of hypothesizing. Yeah. It's definitely something that I'm looking into, is what happens in the resilient human's brain.
Yeah.
I don't know what characteristics are being exhibited, that makes us crave a sense of community so much that we are willing to go out and run organizations or start organizations, right? There are so many mom and pop veteran-focused nonprofits now, that have been started in garages, right? And they've gone from the garage idea to multi-million-dollar nonprofits. The Wound Warrior Project is an example of one of those. They're still a very strong organization, and they're an easy example of something that got started with a group of 4 or 5 people that said, "Hey, we want to be helpful," and then it exploded.
Right. And so there's that end of the spectrum, but there's also the end of the spectrum of the people we've already talked about a little bit, that withdraw, that isolate, that get as far away from community as possible. Ryan, are you seeing that among the people that you come into contact with at the American Legion, that you actually have to go find these people because they're kind of in hiding?
Yes, because right now, obviously, we know there's quite a few veterans in our valley. And really,
how many? Do you have a number?
Right around 800, and dropping, by the way.
800 out of a population of
17,000?
Yeah.
Ish.
Wow, that's...
So the bulk of those numbers are somebody who is collecting a benefit of some sort, whether it's an education benefit, a retirement pension, disability benefit, that sort of a thing. But they also they include data from the previous census.
I see. So that's probably a pretty accurate representation.
Number.
Probably within 100.
Out of 800 people, though, how do you...
With our American Legion, we have 70 members that pay their dues, and then we have about 5 to 8 people that participate, from meaning helping with funerals to going to the meetings to discuss, what we can do for our veterans. So it's a very small percentage, and obviously for me, I would love to get more participation, and then maybe we can do more.
All right. Well, look, we're on the radio. We're on the podcast. You have an opportunity. Maybe some of those 800 people are listening. What would you say to them? What is your appeal as to why it would benefit them to come down and find out what you're doing?
That's been a crux of the question. What does it benefit for themselves? And it's not something that you benefit for yourself, except for that feeling good, benevolent feeling of doing something for others.
So it's really not about you, except in the sense that when you do for others, it kind of is about you. Okay.
Truly.
And we can't pull them in to make them do that, right? It's got to come from within. So,
sure. Well, let's go back then to the sort of military culture that develops, this brotherhood and sisterhood that you develop with the people around you, especially in combat situations or any stressful, high-level, you really got to get this done kind of situation. That could have some appeal, because that's what people lose when they step into isolation as a civilian. But in an organization like yours, perhaps what they could find is a group of people who, once again, is willing to have their back, and that they can provide that service as well.
Definitely. We had one recent veteran join us, and she said, this is my tribe, just that feeling, and, that felt good. It's like, yep, she's back.
So that's a
back
good
with
example.
The tribe.
ThinkRadio is supported by the Gunnison Country Times, Gunnison, Colorado's locally owned hometown newspaper. ThinkRadio is also supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can join the ThinkRadio community of patrons, visit alanwartesmedia.com. That's ALANWARTES media.com.
Let's talk about the need for a second, because you've already said it's about, let's figure out what we can do for our veterans. The fact of the matter is, veterans in America today are struggling. They're struggling with a variety of issues. We've talked about the loss of community, but many of them have also experienced traumatic events that they're having to deal with. Many of them are rotating into and out of combat at a much higher rate, speaking of active duty now, but then they become veterans having done this, having gone back into combat situations much more often than veterans in the past had to.
Absolutely.
What are the ramifications of that? What are you seeing among the veteran population that causes you to think, this is kind of a problem?
Challenges in general, I think, have been multi-generational, right? With trauma. It's just nowadays, thank goodness, with advancements in science and medical care, we are able to isolate some of the root, right, with things with traumatic brain injury, right, or multiple concussion situations, But I think we're able to label some of these challenges now more specifically, and then we're able to develop treatments now that are targeted towards some of these issues. But the biggest disconnect there that I kind of see is the disconnect from the VA to rural communities like ours out here in Gunnison, because we've got a lot of vets that live out in Gunnison. We've got a lot of vets that live down in Lake City that would really like to be able to go to a doctor, within 30, 40 miles of their home. And we are still running into challenges with providers being paid. And so they can't afford to carry $500,000 worth of debt because the VA is pushing back on them for one or two pieces of paper.
So access to care becomes one of the big issues. And I think that's true from what I understand, even in metropolitan areas, sometimes getting in to see...
Well, they're overloaded.
They're overloaded. So access to care is one of those issues. What do you see that veterans are dealing with that most people don't?
Well, I feel like it's similar to non-veterans. I mean, I feel like everybody kind of has the same thing. It's affecting everybody, whether it's a veteran or not. Pretty intriguing. I was at a conference a couple weekends ago, and sure enough, the Vietnam era and everything started talking healthcare, and you know, it just flew over my head because fortunately I just kind of avoid it and hope I don't have to deal with it. But I feel like it's the same conversations that are going on in our society right now about healthcare and what roles, you know, what role government should have in our healthcare. And
let's draw this distinction though, because some of those veterans lack access to healthcare in spite of the fact that their medical conditions were
incurred in service is what we say.
Incurred in service.
Yep. Yeah.
So they might be standing in that conversation that you're describing with a whole different set of thoughts in their head.
For sure. You know, it took me almost 2.5 years actually to resolve my initial kind of claims process with the Department of the VA. You know, even though it was supposedly, you know, to be a warm kind of a handoff from my active duty time directly into the VA time. That didn't really happen. So, you know, granted, there have been quite a few advancements made since 2012, thank goodness.
So things are getting better, in your opinion?
Slowly, but yes, I am committed to saying, yes, things are getting better. They're getting better slowly, and they're only getting better because of like conversations like this, right? And videos and content on the internet and people who are motivated to write stories about these issues on the internet, you know, and get this content distributed appropriately. That's the only reason that they're getting better. They're not necessarily getting better because I think there's not a bunch of, you know, altruistic individuals who are just all of a sudden in Congress going, hey, we're going to write a bunch of new laws to make sure we really care for our vets.
Right.
You know, I mean, the reality is, I think it was $30 billion. It was just added to the Pentagon's budget just this week. You know, now, granted, we're supposed to have an actual 2-year budget now for the DoD, which is great. The DoD's been operating under continuing resolution for a decade. It's really kind of crazy.
Which, just for people who aren't, you know, government geeks, that means they sort of have to sweat whether their money gets renewed.
Correct. You have leaders that are unable to forecast. Right? They're unable to forecast their expenditures, you know, to run their business.
Which in the healthcare world, that's a kind of a big deal.
It's
how do you run
crazy.
a VA hospital if you can't forecast claims expectancy and that sort of thing?
Right. I know that the Grand Junction Hospital has had some challenges with hiring the number of nurses that they would really like to hire. That's a problem. You know, but it is one that we can solve through engagement with, you know, Congressman Tipton's office, engagement with Senator, you know, both of our senators here in the state of Colorado. And I know that they're listening. You know, I've seen some tangible action. And so I trust them somewhat, but I think we still have to continue to engage.
What you're describing here is a very complex situation. This is not easy. There are no easy solutions. And what it all adds up to is, at the end of the day, men and women who have served this country, put their lives on the line, are left standing with inadequate care.
That's correct.
And inadequate access to services and resources.
Yeah.
Ryan, how do we get out of that? What's the path forward?
Have these motivated individuals like Steve. It's amazing when I get to chat with Steve and learn a lot of what he's doing and, you know, all his projects that he's got going on. I mean, it's activism. And, you know, some people probably are like, who's Tipton? It's like, I mean,
that's a bigger problem than even this.
Right,
right.
I mean,
that is actually.
So it's being a voice, participating, talking to our Congress.
I think that's the most valuable thing. If I convey no other message from engaging with you today, we need our community, the whole community, to pick up the phone, to do more than just, honestly, than sit on social media and comment out there in that world. Like, we need more physical, tangible activism in this arena in order to ensure that our elected representatives actually really do hear from us, and they hear from us in a constructive way.
And so there is that pathway, that kind of activism, which is sort of focused at the national level and shaking loose the the political will and the resources to get some of this stuff done. I'm also wondering, though, because to go to a funeral and preside as a representative of the veteran community at a funeral, that's a different kind of activism, right? That's a different kind of getting involved with supporting veterans. Down at the community level, what can people do to make a difference in this equation, and the fact that we've got so many of these people who are struggling? They feel a lack of gratitude from their community. They feel a lack of support. What can average people do, short of getting on the phone with Tipton, to make a difference?
Well, for our American Legion, I think I appreciate the businesses that support us with our flag program, because that gives us operating capital to do our mission, so to speak, for our community. I think that's a minimum thing, just donating to our cause. It gives us the money, because obviously we can even do more with the money, even just with exposure. Like I sent out stickers to all the businesses that participated with our flag program that they can put in their front window and see it. I think that helps us.
I'm always encouraging of business owners that I meet to donate to the Legion. I think that the Legion can act as a wonderful conduit to help us propel the next generation to success. The Legion has the ability to offer scholarships to youth in the community. If business owners are looking to ensure that they help elevate our youth in our community specifically as well, then come and talk to Ryan, cut a small check, great, and then we'll give funds to some of these high school seniors that are going to go and attack college, the next phase of their lives, hopefully be the next generation of leaders and business owners.
Which sounds great, but the question was, how do we help veterans?
Well, in my opinion, that is a way to help veterans, because what that does is it takes a burden off of a veteran family that may be living on a $1,200 a month pension.
So their kid may be the one
Correct.
that gets the scholarship.
Right, absolutely. Adults are adults, right? We have already lived at least a sliver of life, and enough probably to where we know, like, okay, I've got to go. Maybe I need to take on a third job, to stay living in this high cost community. We have the power. To do that, and for veterans too, especially if they're suffering, they also have the power to find me, to connect with me, to make sure that they are as well taken care of as possible, financially, education-wise, pension, retirement-wise, that sort of thing. Because oftentimes many veterans, especially from previous generations, folks have a lot of pride, and they don't actually even feel comfortable speaking with somebody like me, because many of them, I think, assume, and I've been told, that, hey, Steve, well, you work at the VA, and there's a negative feeling there. And so I just try to do my best to encourage them to still reach out. I don't work for the VA. However, it is my job to make sure you are as well connected with the VA as you can be, and that you're compensated, honestly, for potential injuries or medical conditions that you may be experiencing, at 60, 65 years old.
As a result of your service.
That is a direct result of service from when they were 20.
And all they have to do is be willing to say, I need this.
Exactly. I try to find out what their needs may be, even if they don't realize that there's something there potentially for them. I've had a handful of folks approach me recently that said, Steve, I got this ringing in my ears. Well, that's an easy thing. That's a simple test at the VA. It definitely takes, one day of your time. But then after that, if you're service connected for a condition like that, then the rest of the world of medical care begins to open up for you within the VA.
So when a veteran comes and gets access to care through the VA, for instance, that actually helps everyone.
It can.
It can help the employer who's no longer having to pay for that care.
It can.
Et cetera.
There's very little known tax breaks under the Warrior Act, the Warrior Tax Act. It was passed by President Obama. Congress authorized direct dollar-for-dollar tax incentives up to $10,000 per veteran for small business owners. So if the small business owner knows about this and that veteran meets certain employment criteria, but oftentimes these folks qualify for tax incentives that they don't even know about
For
themselves,
employing
right?
one
For
of these
employing one of these people, and saving people money, but then also maybe making a little bit more.
Well, so
right?
here's an answer to the question that I posed then. What can the community do to help support veterans? One of the things might be educate yourself about how you can be involved in programs like that, even if you're not a veteran yourself.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So there are a lot of options, a lot of ways to get at this. I want to ask you about veteran suicide. Because when you go on social media, for instance, or some news outlets, you really hear this a lot, that there's sort of this perceived scandal in American society because so many veterans are committing suicide, and you'll hear a variety of numbers per day. What's going on with that?
The latest numbers were published in December, right, at the end of last year, and the VA was reporting, and they were able to actually collect data from all 50 states this time around too. They've now done this twice beyond the initial report that was grabbed by various businesses, media outlets, that sort of thing. In 2012, there was a report about 22 suicides a day for veterans, but that report was erroneous. It had only collected data from less than half of the states in America. Right? There's no mandatory reporting on death certificates for somebody to check, are you a veteran or not? That's not consistent across all 50 states. But this time around, I think the VA has done more due diligence, and they actually do have data from all 50 states. And that data is showing much closer to 20 suicides a day, which is still completely unacceptable.
Of course.
But we are very close to being right in line with the civilian, population, to the non-military population. I believe that the suicide problem is still, a major issue. However, the therapies that are in place are being improved daily, and access to care is slowly but surely being improved upon, So we still have a lot more work to do. I'm not trying to minimize the problem, but I am definitely a person who I very much disagree with these businesses and organizations that run around preaching an improper number based on incorrect data, in order to collect donations from giving, members of the American public, or businesses that are attempting to profit off of quirky logos so that they can sell more T-shirts. That kind of stuff bothers me at my very core, because it's basically leveraging the deaths of our brothers and sisters, in order for them to go, buy a house or take a ski vacation or, something like that. I mean, it's to line their own pockets with cash, so that frustrates me.
Yeah. Does that sort of thing, in your view, interfere with actual appropriate action?
It does.
And in what ways does it do
It does,
that?
especially because they're small nonprofits or smaller businesses that are, again, leveraging incorrect and incomplete data for profit, and they're taking away focus from businesses and nonprofits like the Legion, like Ryan's organization. That is dangerous to me. It's dangerous because it's funneling dollars away from an honest and upfront effort. And now I'm guaranteed, I'm sure after this I'll be criticized by some of our brothers and sisters about it, but because people argue, we want to say, oh, well, everything helps, right? If you're helping, good job, attaboy kind of a thing. I respectfully disagree. By diverting dollars away from well-known and reputable organizations so that somebody can start up a new one, in my opinion, is a bit asinine. We're spreading ourselves very thinly when we don't have to. And so I wish we could encourage more of these other organizations that are diverting these funds to just be upfront about it and be like, hey, the tactics right now, they are slowly working. We are reducing the suicide rate daily. And maybe we should band together maybe a little bit more with some of these other more established organizations.
Ryan, do you agree with this point of view that some of the emphasis on veteran suicide is a little bit overblown and maybe even misguided?
I think we have an expert here that sees the data, that looks at the data, and obviously I'm pointing at Steve.
You weren't pointing at me, I'll tell you that.
And so again, it's great always to question data, where it comes from, what's the sampling, et cetera, who's making the arguments. For veteran suicide, I guess I believe with what Steve has and what he looks at.
Because one of the points that people make when they bring up and start waving their arms about 22 suicides a day, I mean, that was a very compelling number. Something about the number 22 just really grabbed people's imagination. I'm kind of stumped as to why.
It was the first big data dump, is what happened back in 2012.
But when that happens and people start waving their arms, there are some messages that are embedded in that. And one of them was that this is a nation that doesn't care about its veterans. This is a nation that, we send them off to fight, to defend the country, and then we bring them home, and they're so distressed that they're killing themselves in droves. Is that perception something that you see as erroneous? Ryan, I'm asking you.
I don't see it, so I don't know the data. I can't really answer that. To me, I think a lot of things with veterans get politicized. Specifically, just even recent with the NFL thing. It's like, they were protesting, and suddenly people take that protesting of the way they did it as they're not supporting our troops. They don't love America.
It was a Green Beret who advised him to do it.
Yeah, like, if you kneel, that's still respecting. And just, so I guess maybe I'm tying that thought into how we perceive the veteran suicide. I think it ties into how we take care of our veterans with, the VA. Back to those conversations I even heard at that convention, they're talking about basically socialized medicine. They don't want it to get privatized. And I'm just like thinking of those parallels of those arguments that we have in our civilian arguments role of government in our healthcare. And I see the similarities, and I'm like, I'm sure the same guy that's saying we don't want our VA privatized, goes and votes for something maybe in the booth that completely is the contrary to that.
You raise an interesting point, though, and that is that one way that people can educate themselves is to resist the politicization of veterans' issues. Because ultimately what we're talking about are people.
Right.
We're not talking about this side of the aisle or that side of the aisle, right wing, left wing, conservative, liberal. None of that really matters very much when there's a person who is suffering with daily pain from an injury or from feelings of isolation, et cetera, and so on. And so communities like ours can contribute, maybe a lot, by simply resisting that and keeping in mind that what we're dealing with are real people.
Right, absolutely. And I think the interesting thing about working on healthcare for vets is that we're a microcosm of society, but because of the amount of data that Uncle Sam already has on us as people, we can study that much more easily, right? We can look at experimental treatments, right? We can look at experimental methods of providing access to care. I know that we've got a new VA director out in Grand Junction, Mr. Kilmer, and he's a big advocate for the VA has like mobile healthcare clinics that they can drive around into rural areas like ours, right? And then provide some daily on-site care. I applaud those newer efforts to try to push care deeper into the communities, but I also hope that we can eventually have a service agreement of sorts where we don't need to send veterans all the way out 3 hours to Grand Junction. We can just send them right here to Gunnison Valley Health.
Because these doctors can get paid.
Absolutely. When these doctors can get paid, and these doctors can also provide most of the basic care and services.
The thing that people are sitting in lines waiting for at the big VA hospitals.
Right. Because I can tell you right now, our amputee population, or population that's requiring a bunch of extra specialty care for, traumatic brain injury and that sort of thing, that population, especially in Gunnison County, is very low. Very. I'd probably count them on one hand.
Right. Well, they're living near big VA hospitals.
Exactly. Right. And that's what I had a couple of veterans come out 2 weeks ago, and they are both amputees, and they came to visit, and I said, man, Steve, you live in a beautiful place. This place is gorgeous. We're considering moving out here, but do you know of a good prosthetist? To help us. I said, well, Denver.
Denver.
Yeah, Denver,
Right.
I think the needs of the bulk of us could be served just, honestly, I think with the flick of a pen and a service agreement.
What I'm hearing from both of you guys is that we're making progress. We're moving forward. Not as fast or as dramatically as we'd like to see, perhaps, but it is happening. Is that accurate, Ryan?
Well, and I think as a community, we all have that sense of supporting our troops, supporting our veterans. I think that helps carry that conversation. It helps with, to me, that seems like it's always the bipartisan issue with our politics. And, just even, I think what I hear from veterans from Vietnam era, I think they're finally getting their due of, because they didn't feel it back then. And I still hear some of those salty conversations from the community, from those experiences of coming home from Vietnam. I can't imagine how that was. So I can only view it how I see it now. It's something I've never had a negative, reaction when I tell them, whether American Legion organization or something. They're usually, the businesses are quick to write a check. You don't even have to really sell it. It's there. So I can only assume our healthcare is following that direction.
Well, there's a lot of work to be done, but a lot of work has been done and is being done.
True.
So that's good news. Fellas, thanks for coming in and talking with me about this today.
Sure.
I appreciate it. Steve, Ryan.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Great opportunity. Love to, anytime we can talk about our veterans and obviously for me to even talk about the American Legion is a great opportunity. So thanks for the invite.
Let's do it again.
Think Radio is supported by the Gunnison Country Times, Gunnison, Colorado's locally owned hometown newspaper.
Think Radio is a production of Alan Wardis Media. The show's executive producer is Issa Forrest. Associate producer, Kat Seibert. Original music by Issa Forrest. New episodes are available for download every Monday morning on iTunes and at alanwardismedia.com. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Think Radio.